I think that nature, well, I mentioned this yesterday, that biology, let's leave nature out of this for a minute, biology is some kind of chemical strategy for the conquest of dimensionality. I said this yesterday, but I'm not sure I was understood. And what I mean by that is the entire history of biology, from the first naked DNA to this moment, is a history of progressively taking more and more control of more and more dimensions. First, primitive life moved. It had no eyes. It simply felt its way. That means it was like two-dimensional life. It just feels its way down a linear creode of sensation, defecating, eating, undergoing mitosis, and so forth and so on. But it's a two-dimensional thing. Well, then life acquired light-sensitive chemistry, which it sequestered on the surface of its cells, driven by serotonin, interestingly enough. And this light-sensitive chemistry gave the idea of a gradient. The organism had, however dimly, the notion here and there. And to have the notion of going from here to there, you have to add in the notion now and then. And what these notions being added in are dimensional vectors into the reality space. Well, then the entire history of life, from, let's say, the Crossopterygian fishes to Homo habilis, is simply the history of developing more efficient organs of motion in the three-dimensional world. Better eyes, better arms, better legs, mobility, motility, so forth and so on. Then, with the appearance of true human beings and language, an entirely new dimension, let's call it the fourth dimension of time, begins to be invaded in a very subtle way. It's that monkeys can't tell stories to each other about past experiences or hoped for denouements. Human beings can. That act of linguistic recollection is a small conquest of dimensionality. Well, once you invent writing, then all of the past can, in a sense, be kept in the present. The present is not a narrow slice of experience fading off into the past and the future. It becomes instead like a train moving into the future. The future is unknowable, but the past can be recollected and analyzed. And if the analysis is sophisticated enough, one can begin to triangulate outward toward the future. The history of science is the history of prediction. Well, what is prediction? It's taking control of a previously uncontrolled dimension, the future. And I think that the rise of electronic technology, the rise of extremely complex language-using societies means that we're about to go wholly in to the fourth dimension, the temporal dimension. And we see ourselves as distinct from our technologies. You see, like when you are in a car, you think, I am a human being driving a human invention. But there is a point of view from which, no, you are just a human being who has put on another level of humanness, which happens to have wheels under it, and is rolling along. In other words, genetics, that changes the stuff of our bodies. Epigenetics, which we call ideology and technology, changes the environment in which our bodies operate. And I think we're getting set basically to decamp into the imagination. That the imagination is as real a place as across the river is if you've just acquired eyes. It's something you're seeing for the first time and then generating an appetite to go into. And this has been kicking around for 15 or 20,000 years. A shaman is a seer, is a prophet, is a higher dimensional mathematician. And they may not, use tensor equations to express what they're doing, but mathematics before symbols is experience. And so I really believe history is ending very soon. I cannot conceive of 100 years in the future at the present accelerated rate of development. We have unleashed such novelty that I think we're in the terminal phase of decamping from three-dimensional space. We are leaving the womb of Newtonian being for something else, the imagination. And the birth is tumultuous. An entire planet is at risk. And eventually, toxemia seems to be setting in. We've used up all the nutritional resources in the womb. The walls are closing in. We're suffocating. Our political systems don't work. Our social systems are breaking down. If you're a realist, a pessimist, then you just say, well, this is it, folks. This is the smash up. The party lasted 20,000 years, and here comes the bill. But you might think that if you were a fetus trapped in a collapsing womb at transition, you could not conceive of the stockbroker, fashion designer, or whatever that you are going to be in another dimension, in another reality that you're being born into. And I think our aspiration is the conquest of death. Our religions promise it, and if our gods can't deliver, we'll elbow them aside and do it ourselves, thank you. And these things aren't decisions made by a single person or even a group of people. They come from the bone. It's who we are. We aspire to be magic, and we probably, given our track record, will achieve it. As I said yesterday, James Joyce said, man will be dirigible. A humorous thing to say, but yes.
I don't really understand what you mean by that, like even for the birth of the imagination. You mean like that Star Trek episode where they have no bodies, and the guy makes himself into a big cat?
One of the nice things about my position is I don't have to entirely understand myself because I'm self-defined as a primitive. When we talk about decamping from Newtonian space, and you're asking me, what would it look like? I'm as puzzled as you are. I don't know. Is it nanotech? Are we going to become ant-high and all live in 1 acre of the rainforest? Are we going to find a way to completely transpose ourselves into the net and just shed our bodies the way we once shed the placenta that connected us? I once said the body is the placenta of the soul. But is that a religious statement or a technological goal? What do we mean the body is the placenta of the soul? And then people get really agitated because a lot of people, and I include myself among them, rather like the body. And you can imagine a debate in the Archaeozoic ocean when people of a very scaly and lantern-jawed type said, listen, we're leaving for the land. You say, you cannot live on the land. There's no water on the land. The land is our whole being. We're defined by the water, the joy of swimming, the great, on and on and on. Well, some organisms turned their back on that. And so then we had the conquest of the land. It's a big thing. It's a big thing because what we're being asked is, what is humanness? What can you discard and still be human? Can we discard our bodies and still be human? Can we discard our ethics and still be human? I'd rather keep my ethics and get rid of the body. But, we are sexual creatures. What is life? What is sex without a body, for crying out loud? How does that work and look? But it is really not ours to decide. We have grabbed hold of a tiger several billion years ago. Nature is a bootstrapping process, and it seems fairly unsentimental. You know, there's no tears shed for the great sauropods that once stalked the planet. They were wiped out in an asteroid impact. That allowed the arise of the angiosperms and the mammals. We are the children and the inheritors of a planetary catastrophe. If this planet hadn't been wrecked 65 million years ago, we'd still be here. We wouldn't be here. Well, then what is our position on planetary catastrophe? We're in the process of making one. Is it so that 65 million years in the future, an organism filled with love and justice and intelligence will look back at our skeletons in the shale and say, well, they had a good thing going, but if it hadn't been for their extinction, we wouldn't be here. The very large scale is very large indeed. One of the things that's so interesting about the visionary plants is that they give you a large, large picture. I think the vegetable mind views death in a different way. Vegetables are eternal in a sense. Through vegetative propagation, they can live virtually forever. Life lies very close to the surface in us, and if it's crushed out, we're very alarmed. Our sense of uniqueness is so highly evolved that our own death becomes for us the most universal tragedy we can conceive of. That's a serious ego dislocation, I maintain. Yeah.
Discussion of that, it takes place in the Western Newtonian kind of culture, materialistic culture. What about the other cultures that never embraced this way of life, this view, and also like people who, they don't have access to these technologies, maybe that's what they're worried about, whether that meals can be fine, this is the last thing that they have access to. What are these play in the kind of dynamics of?
Well, nature has two impulses. In the particular case, the impulse is always toward equilibrium. Animal species seek to establish niches for themselves in ecosystems that can then be maintained indefinitely, just the way you seek a job where you'll then get money, and without working too hard or eating too much excrement, you'll be able to maintain yourself indefinitely. If you look at all of nature right now, the human species is where the evolutionary cutting edge has become concentrated. And then if you look at the human species, the place where the changing novelty has been concentrated is in high-tech industrial democratic civilization. I don't call it Western anymore because its leading exponent is Japan. But high-tech industrial democracies are the only social systems that are still evolving and changing. So I think they also serve who only stand and wait. These traditional societies perform the role very much of an animal species at equilibrium in an ecosystem. They preserve values related to stability and homeostasis. Meanwhile, in these places where these creative creodes have begun to cascade, novelty is what's being explored. But the novelty feeds back and changes the context in which these equilibrium-seeking systems operate. The universe, I believe, is an engine for the production and conservation of novelty. The universe will sacrifice everything achieved to achieve something new. You can see that in looking at this asteroid impact 65 million years ago. I mean, this was a climaxed planetary ecosystem of tropical forests from pole to pole, filled with complex animals and ecosystems and many phyla represented, but it was all thrown away to make way for the mammals and the angiosperms. I mean, speaking teleologically. So I think novelty is what nature values above all else. And that, interestingly, leads on to the notion of an ethic for us, because that confers immediate central importance on the human enterprise. The orthodox view is that we're a chance anomaly, an eccentricity in the cosmic game. But if the conservation of novelty is what the universe is about, then we are its pride and joy, its crown jewel, the firstborn son and heir apparent. And the other thing is this ingression or this movement into novelty has been going on since the beginning of the universe, but always ever faster, ever faster. So in the early universe, once things settled down after the Big Bang, it was dull for a long, long time. I mean, there wasn't much happening. There weren't even stars. There was just hydrogen aggregating, and then eventually there were aggregates of hydrogen so large that the pressures at the centers of those aggregates of hydrogen caused a new property to emerge, fusion. And fusion cooks out heavy elements like iron and sulfur and carbon. And when carbon cooks out, new emergent properties become possible. Molecular chemistry, rather than simple atomic systems, comes into play. Well, then elaborate that for a few billion years, and you get long-chain polymers. They're like supermolecules, and they have the quality or the ability to template and reproduce themselves. Well, so suddenly you get a whole new emergent domain in nature, the domain of the self-copying, self-replicating molecules. And then they begin to embed themselves in membranes and so forth, and then you get nucleated cells, and then colonies of nucleated cells, and from there to advanced mammals, it's just a matter of time. And then the organs of locomotion seem to have been perfected. The fastest animal in the world can run 70 miles an hour, something like that. And so then the development seems to concentrate in the nervous system. The coordination no longer of space, but of information. Information becomes the new coinage. Advanced binocular vision systems evolve. Pack signaling systems evolve in social animals. And then, at some point, the level of complexity is sufficient to cross a boundary into true language, true representation of the past in the present through symbolic activity. In each case, these stages are happening faster and faster and faster. Language is probably less than 100,000 years old. It may be half that age. Well, good grief, that's less than 3,000 generations in the past. Language, that's yesterday. And yet, since the inception of language, look at what has happened. Urbanism, global conquest of the environment, mathematical conquest of nature. We can call down the fires that burn in the hearts of stars to the deserts of this planet, or if necessary, down upon the heads of our enemies. That's an extraordinary feat for protoplasm to be able to undertake. Extraordinary. And so I think this accelerating novelty indicates that we are on the brink of just going down the novelty well and becoming as unrecognizable to ourselves as we would be to Tyrannosaurus Rex if it were introduced to us as the heirs to its struggle and dreams. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things to me in visible landscape museum, and you have to correct me if I did this incorrectly. In the Motivational talk of what it might look like, I think there was one line that said, it was September 21st, 2012, and the 22nd may look just like the 21st. There may be no change on the surface. It may look the same. And I'm curious how that fits in, because all the questions, well, are we going to be walking on a small yard, or are we going to be self-dribbling things that we talked about yesterday? Or is that day going to pass by and, I don't know, there's 1% see it and 99% doesn't, or is it going to be that 100% doesn't see it, or is there going to be nothing?
Probably, well, one way it could happen is that as we get closer and closer to it, our ability to accept these strange things becomes broader and broader, so when the moment finally comes, yes, you are a self-dribbling jeweled basketball, but hey, it ain't no big deal, and you saw it coming years ago, so what? I don't know. I vacillate on all of this because as a rationalist, I'm very puzzled by my intellectual burden of a completely irrational revelation. I would never have wished this upon myself. I'm much more comfortable as a fairly hard-nosed skeptical thinker. Yet I've spent so much time with this idea that I guess I have become infected with it. It now seems to me as reasonable as anything else. There is, unremarked by science, a universal tendency toward complexity through time. It's a law, as real as the law of the speed of light or the segregation of genes. But science has never said that, because science is, as practiced out of the 19th century, is militantly anti-teleological. In other words, it denies any end goal, any purpose, any predefined end state. Science just thinks the universe is a random walk. But I think it's becoming harder and harder to maintain that idea in the face of the evidence. There are too many choices. If you have a protein of several thousand atoms, it has 10 high 16 folding configurations it can choose from. If it worked through those things by trial and error, it would take the life of the universe for that molecule to figure out its minimum energy configuration and assume it. So there is a kind of logic, or there are constraints that we aren't aware of that push processes toward completion. And I think, the new sciences of chaos theory, dynamics, complexity, fractals, strange attractors are going to deliver this into our understanding. It's a very exciting time. I mean, we're taking the first intellectual steps toward the real re-understanding of nature since at least the invention of the calculus and probably the invention of Greek mathematics. Yeah.
This model that you're talking about sounds a little bit to me like a phase transition that in consciousness. When it reaches the point of complexity and then there's a transition, but it seems we're all connected on some level, this morphic field and all, but that makes it, few will start and then it's just like popcorn, all of a sudden everyone has that
like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Well, you put your finger on it. The key word is connectedness. I'm very interested in the philosophical, if you want to put it that way, implications of the World Wide Web and the Internet. I mean, the Internet is a fascinating thing. You can't see it. Therefore, if you're not into it, the world appears to have remained the same. Nothing has changed. And yet, actually, the largest human artifact ever created has sprung into being in the last 5 years. It's as big as this planet, and nobody controls it. It has no central control. No one can decide that it shall be this or shall be that. There are certain areas under limited control. Well, but what does the internet do? Well, it connects us together. It broadens and deepens and makes more immediate the cultural database that we're all swimming in. And I think that probably it is a model for, or not a model, but it is an anticipation of this transcendental object at the end of time. I mean, I have said in these lectures, my idea of the future perfect state is a world of 500 million human beings of all races, genders, sexual persuasions, so forth and so on. 500 million well-fed, healthy people living mostly in warm climates, largely naked, very little physical cultural manifestation. But if you could project yourself into one of these people's minds or bodies, you would see that when they close their eyes, there are menus hanging in space. Those menus are there because at age 3 there was a surgical implant behind the eyelids of something like a very small contact lens. And that is the philosopher's stone. That is the culmination of 10,000 years of technical evolution and engineering dreams. And what it boils down to is a little black disc that's surgically implanted behind your eyelid, and that's your interface to the culture. And you can move into the net, which is, of course, virtually implemented. It's not text. It's not even hypertext. It's a three-dimensional, non-material world ruled by the laws not of physics, but the imagination. And I call this turning the body inside out. This is what the cultural enterprise is for. We want to live in the imagination with the body as a freely commandable object in the imagination. In other words, replace the laws of physics with the laws of dream or imagination. This is culturally within our reach right now. I mean, if it were as important as piling up nuclear stockpiles or screwing people over in 100 different ways, we'd have it in 5 years, not 17. As it is, we'll probably have to wait 17 years. But the fact that we can make a model like that, that's a bridge from where we're sitting to a spiritually transcendental realm that's within reach, is, I think, very positive. Now all we have to do is fill in the blanks. Keep taking psychedelics so that our engineering standards stay high, so that we stay focused on the goals that we're trying to maximize, and then try to promote the idea that anxiety is inappropriate. Anxiety poisons the will to action. And I really think that this is going to be the task of the high-tech alternative culture, is to provide an optimistic vision. Because you see, the people who run the world are becoming more and more panic-stricken because a world is ending. Their world is ending. The world of the shell game and the international corporation and the propagandized passive electorate and all these things that have been, that game is ending. And there is no substitute vision being discussed at the upper echelons of the control mechanism of this society. It's coming from the grassroots. The people at the top are too paralyzed with the poisons they've imbibed by feeding at the trough of the old order. They can't think their way out of their dilemma. In fact, they have to pay guys with ponytails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They're so distanced from the things they rule, you see.